so if the district is married to building projects, then 2024 is our gold anniversary, 50 years of capital construction. Early on, we identified a lot of need through master planning, but we didn't have any money to solve the problems we identified. And we received a federal HUD grant for our first ever project on Sanderson Gulch, this beauty. But we quickly realized we were fond of federal funding, but didn't want to put a ring on it. So the construction fund was signed into law in 1973. We started collecting funds in 1974. And in the words of Scott Tucker, now we can talk some turkey. That is a direct quote. And we've learned a lot. And our design approach has evolved over the years. And the most interesting place, I think, where you can physically see this evolution is along Little Dry Creek in Westminster. When I purchased my own drone, the first place I wanted to fly was here because it has such a great visual story to tell, and it's best viewed as the bird flies. And this imagery was filmed on the same day within a 2-mile stretch. These were all capital projects. Now, with the older projects, you see lots of confinement and structure, and our designs have always had conveyance and stability at their core, and believe it or not, multi-objective solutions. But in the beginning, the objectives we considered, the possibilities we pondered were limited. It was generally limited to trails and adjacent parks where they existed. Now, in fairness, these older projects were built because people flooded. Here you see Scott Tucker looking at flood damage in the 80s. So these projects dramatically reduced flood risk for people. But it's clear with the newer project, what else is possible? What else should be possible along an urban waterway? And so a lot happens in 50 years, so I thought it would be informative and entertaining to share some history, lessons learned, and where we want to go from here. Well, there were a little over 1 million people in the district when we started. They lived mostly in the red areas. It's nearly 3 million now. We've collectively invested over $2.5 billion inflation-adjusted dollars to build 645 projects, those ones in yellow. There are less people and property at flood risk today than when we started, and as Drew mentioned earlier, flood-related death rates have gone down, even though the population's tripled, so we're doing really good work. And this map shows our capital projects over the years, and our largest investments have been centered around where that first million people lived because most capital projects were necessitated by prior land use and infrastructure decisions, some that did not age well. We had creeks getting squeezed in, shoved underground like the one Jeff showed earlier, or outright ignored. Neighborhoods in any American city older than the 1970s probably weren't planned around flood risk very well, so there's been a lot of work to do, and we're still addressing flood risk in older parts of town, including on Sanderson Gulch, because flood mitigation is messy and expensive in every way imaginable. Now, speaking of expensive, one of the metrics I keep an eye on is construction cost per linear foot along the center line. And this graph shows some recent results. You see a range of $500 a foot up to $20,000 a foot. This is all in 2024 dollars. The leftmost project was on the West Fork of Second Creek at a little over $500. The right bookend was on Sanderson Gulch, just downstream of that very first project at nearly $20,000 per foot. On this graph, green represents naturalized channel designs in unconfined corridors. Gray is all storm drains, and then yellow projects have a mixture of open channels, pipes, walls, bridges, culverts. Now, when I change this around to add in the design flows, we get construction cost per foot per CFS. Now, because the storm drains don't carry as much flow, they show up big time here. Jim Watt's Happy Canyon project is the furthest left, so it was actually the most cost-effective project I tracked in the last 5 to 10 years. The Uvalde project on the far right, it's so expensive because we're tearing out a concrete-lined channel in the street median. Rebuilding the entire right-of-way corridor was unavoidable. That's expensive. And I'm not saying that more expensive projects like this are unworthy. Every project is contextual, sometimes painfully contextual, but even in a painful context, the value we're able to create can make it worth it. So while this depicts dollars per foot per CFS, what's not on here is dollars per unit of value, because value gets beyond conveyance. But as we continue making land use and infrastructure decisions, particularly in greenfield developments, these costs on the right are what we'd like to avoid. So that's how much construction costs varies, but what have we learned about life cycle costs? Well, 20th century approaches were largely about control. We even used to be called the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. And we've learned how much control we actually have, which is not really that much. Urban waterways are dynamic and uncertain regardless of what an equation or model tells us. So we've tried a lot of techniques to see what works, and so much has worked, as we saw in 2013. But we've also learned a lot. We've learned that some infrastructure is high maintenance, some is low maintenance. There's no such thing as zero maintenance in an urban area. And this graph is a simple illustration of life cycle cost. We have the initial capital project, and then this period of low cost that feels really good. Could span the remaining careers of those that worked on the project. You never have to think about it again. It's great. Now, while it's unrealistic to expect our projects to last forever, some of them age less gracefully than others. We get this second curve when they need to be repaired or even replaced. And the more confined and structural our solutions are, the more likely that second hump becomes. So not only were these projects more expensive to begin with, they'll be expensive again because structural solutions get weaker over time. With more naturalized solutions, not only are they less expensive up front, except perhaps in land, they tend to age better because vegetated solutions tend to get stronger over time. Maintenance becomes more about gardening than it is about replacing concrete and steel. Looks more like the green curve. On Little Dry Creek, the recent project costs around $2 per foot per year for routine maintenance. The little green blips. The older project, it costs nothing per year right now, but one day when it needs to be replaced, it'll cost us $2,000 a linear foot. It protects people from floods. It has been an asset, but it's also a financial liability that's someday going to come due. And it happens all the time, and I find it to be a special kind of torture to replace concrete channel lining. It's expensive, it's unsatisfying, and should you ever want to tear it out, like on the Uvalde project, it's a capital project with a capital C. The cross-section is not big enough to allow the roughness of vegetation without exacerbating flood risk. So we have to reshape the entire corridor, in this case, fence line to fence line, and then some. This is actually under construction as we speak. Now, even vegetated solutions can be high maintenance. When we first embraced greener solutions, it was purely to comply with permits. So if a permit called for 50 willows, we'd plant 100. Now, don't any ecologists come after me, but sometimes too much of a good thing, they're a good thing. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing, especially in a smaller system that could get clogged. Drop structures can definitely be high maintenance, as you heard Jeff talk about earlier. We've repaired so many drop structures, and we've learned that smaller is better for lots of reasons. On Rock Creek in Superior, you see an older 7-foot structure that spans the 100-year flood with big boulders. You know, look at there's some cars in the upper left of that image for a sense of scale. And then just downstream on the same creek is some newer 1-foot structures that only span the active channel. That big boulder drop will someday cost 5 to 10 times the cost per foot of vertical drop to replace than the smaller ones. Now, you know, Jim's example earlier had some smaller ones and then a bigger one upstream, and sometimes your context dictates that maybe you need a bigger one, but if you don't need to put a bigger one in, don't, because they tend to not age very well. Underpasses, when those work well, they may have the biggest public safety improvement of anything we do. You know, kids don't have to cross a busy street. That's valuable on a daily, hourly basis. But when they don't work, they can create a safety issue. They're expensive to retrofit, and we've even had to abandon them at times. We have good criteria, but underpasses are contextual, and it's hard to make them truly formulaic. So here we had a failed stormwater pump. That's the trail full of water. Here we had sediment deposition issues that got so bad we had to convert it to an at-grade crossing. I had to do the same thing here because the curvy alignment and frequent mud on the trail led to a cyclist slipping and breaking her leg. On this one, a mother took refuge with her young child during a storm. Flow suddenly entered the underpass, swept the child from her arms, and the child drowned. The walled sections on either side gave them no safe way to get out of the creek even if they wanted to. And this is why we're very sensitive to safety in underpasses, and this section eventually got replaced with a subsequent project, another big red hump. Detention basins, they do wonders to protect people and property. This is that Englewood Dam that protected Englewood that Jeff mentioned earlier. In older parts of town, these are really important, but the bigger they are, the more expensive they are to maintain, as anybody who owns a jurisdictional dam will tell you. And most of the big flood control dams around town are at most 50 to 60 years old, but already some really big maintenance bills are coming due. So Niver Dam, this is on that rain-on mesh study that David and Jeff talked about earlier. This drastically reduced flood risk. There's over 1,500 acres and it drains into a 36-inch pipe, so it does a whole lot. Here's when it was first built. It needed only a 16-page plan set, the good old days. Eventually, the channel silted in, outlet structure clogged, reservoir got scary full, and some dudes with nice farmer stands cleaned it off by hand with rakes. And then we added this birdcage trash rack, which worked really well for a while, but then eventually we got some cavitation and the outlet pipes started wearing out. So then in order to repair the outlet pipes, we had to tear the whole thing off, so we replaced it with a brand new outlet structure and forebay. That cost $1 million, and we're getting ready to spend even more than that coming soon on the Englewood and Holly dams. Really valuable infrastructure, but not low maintenance, especially when they get this big. So, as our city expands into new areas, infrastructure that keeps us on the green line, that's the goal. And as we reimagine older neighborhoods, the red line is sometimes unavoidable if we hope to create value, and sometimes it's worth it. And while some of this may come across as criticism of past projects, the truth is we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't learned a lot of these lessons. And this backdrop explains a lot of what we mean when we talk about low maintenance, because we've learned from 50 years of our own infrastructure decisions. It's kind of a mark of how long you've been at the district if you've had to fix one of your own projects, and that would include me at this point. But what else do we always talk about in addition to low maintenance? That's right, high function. This is about value creation. And we've always been driven to provide conveyance and stability, the H&H part of our work. And while those elements are foundational to positive outcomes along urban waterways, I kind of think of them as the black and white aspects of our work. Not necessarily easy, but they're quantifiable and mathematical in ways that we're really used to working with. So upon this black and white foundation, we've added these other elements of urban stream function, the geomorphology, vegetation, community values. So if H&H is black and white, then these bring the color, the browns, the greens, all the other colors of the rainbows. This combination is what it takes to make projects go from good to great. Because flood safety is important, but floods don't happen very often, so how else can urban waterways be valuable to the community? Because in the end, why does it matter to protect people, property, and our environment? What is that in service to, the higher calling? This morning Laura talked about quality of life. This is all in service to improving quality of life for the people that live in the Denver metro area. Because we have limited shared space, limited public funding, limited access to nature, and the folks in this room, we get to work in the shared spaces where the water is. And that carries responsibility in addition to beyond things like flood control and water quality. And it's very tempting to confine our thinking, our goals, and our money to strict technical disciplines like engineering or landscape or ecology, or to rigid departmental boundaries like public works, parks, open space, transportation. Those disciplines and departments are all good on their own, but they only become great when they work together. And they can each create bad outcomes if they're too singularly focused, too territorial, or if they limit what else is possible. So whenever you hear us talk about high function, low maintenance, 5 elements, I just want you all to understand that all we're trying to do is answer this basic question. It's a way to answer this question, which is, how do we know we're building the best projects we could in all the ways we should to improve quality of life? How do we know we're doing the best we possibly could? Is this our best? That's what we're trying to answer. That framework really is just a way for us to help know we're getting there. And so to illustrate, let me share a quick example I was a part of a few years ago where we were too narrow in our thinking, and I don't feel like I personally lived up to this ideal. So this project was on the Hoffman Drainage Way. It took the floodplain from the red to the blue. Off on the right, it starts interacting with the South Platte River. This project was built in conjunction with the North Metro rail line, which is in yellow. And so where I failed was in not recognizing the stark need for mobility improvements that our project could have helped with. Folks in this affordable housing go up to 88th Avenue for basic shopping and to get to school. There are no sidewalks, so here is what it looks like for a dad and his daughter. And a dad holding his daughter's hand out for a walk is one of the most beautiful things in the world, but when they're on a roadside shoulder next to a constant stream of big commercial trucks, it somehow becomes kind of sad. Now at the North Metro crossing, this drop structure could have been moved upstream to make that tall enough to facilitate an underpass, but none of us thought of it. None of us thought of it because we were so focused on flood mitigation. And I really regret not recognizing this, not being a champion for more holistic solutions, because they deserve better than that. Everybody deserves better than that. Nobody should have to walk in an area like that just to get to a store from your house. And now that that culvert's there, we may never see an underpass at that location. Some of our infrastructure decisions might as well be permanent. And that's because we were just building a flood mitigation project. And I think of the word just as kind of a four-letter word. You know, earlier, Byron didn't say they just wanted a veterans memorial. They wanted the best veterans memorial west of Washington, D.C. He didn't settle for just getting something done. You know, and I get that it's so tempting to just get projects done. Projects take a long time. They take, on average, like 5 years these days, I've found, and that's a long time. But being more aspirational, pondering more possibilities, it doesn't necessarily make projects more expensive, but it does mean we have to work with and talk to more people. It starts to feel like this series of graphics here, you know, adding other disciplines, other departments. It becomes more of a dance, makes a project feel like a program or a network of its own. And these nodes and lines of communication, they don't necessarily mean more cost, but they do necessitate time, intention, and mutual respect. And last year, I stood up here and spoke about how sometimes more is less, and I'm here to tell you this year, well, sometimes more is more too. And investing in cheaper projects that create less incremental value to the community isn't doing our jobs well. And so a fun analogy I found for this, not understanding the difference between cost and value can have consequences, like, say, with tattoos. Tattoos. You know, and some might argue that the $10 tattoo was a complete waste of money. I mean, if you're going to get a tattoo on your arm and then you're reluctant to wear tank tops afterwards, it's probably a bad sign, which that person should be. And then the $100 one is okay, but then the eyes are kind of different shapes and the line's kind of sad. You know, and tattoos are fairly permanent, like our infrastructure, and it's not our job to build the cheapest projects possible, because value is the goal. So now I'm going to graph line tattoos from a value and cost standpoint. I bet you didn't think I was going there. So if you graph the cost and value of these line tattoos, you see that at some point the value goes up. Like, okay, maybe more is more in this case, depending on what you're after. If you're doing like a smiley face, maybe it's not, you know, it's maybe not so much of a curve. It's simple. Go with the $10 smiley face. You're fine. But here's the thing. Not all additional value comes at added cost. On Hoffman, we could have added a lot more value without a lot of added cost if we added an underpass. It would not have created a lot of extra cost, would have created more value per dollar spent. And this idea of value creation always reminds me of the 19th Street overpass in Golden. It could have just been an overpass for cars and bicycles, about half the size it ended up as, but the former Public Works Director, Dan Hartman, insisted on something great where people wouldn't even realize they're on an overpass. This serves as a main entrance into the city of Golden. And in his words, this is what he said. He said, as any good public servant would do, I went and made the project more expensive. That's what he said. But not just more expensive, but more valuable. More valuable, clearly more valuable. Back to Sanderson Gulch. This drop structure needs replacement. It's just upstream of that first ever project I showed earlier. Someone had the curiosity to figure out that the upstream and downstream culverts are due for replacement soon, and rebuilding this drop structure would inhibit improving the Arkansas underpass, which is this one here. It's the shortest one I've ever seen in my life. and you're just hoping another cyclist doesn't come the other direction while you're going through there. And I love the look back, like, yep, I made it, I'm good. Yeah. And so moving this drop structure also makes a new underpass at Florida possible. So it went from a drop structure to a full corridor lowering plus 2 road crossings, became a $16 million project. But here's the thing, great projects find money. They've received $6.5 million in grants so far. Sometimes more is more. On Westerly Creek at the Stanley Marketplace, this started as just a regional water quality facility, shown here in red. This location would have required walls, and it also happens to be in an old landfill. Between the walls and the landfill, the cost for value math wasn't mathing very well. And luckily, someone had the curiosity to ask, could we maybe move the creek and then put the water quality where the creek is now? With this being the only stretch of Westerly Creek in the area that's never been improved, that made a heck of a lot more sense, and it avoided walls in the landfill. Started as perhaps a $2 million project, became a $13 million project that is creating vastly more value per dollar invested, and it's received $2.6 million in grants so far, and they're hoping for more. Great projects find money. Now, these are all big examples, but not every project needs to be to this scale to create more value. On the North Outfall project, we were just building a retrofit storm drain. That's what we were doing, to protect people and property from flooding. This is a really old neighborhood, so no water quality treatment of any kind between these pipes and the South Platte River, so we added a big trash vault. A little added cost, also more value. Also wasn't a difficult thing to add to the project, but somebody had to think of it. It took intention. Wrightwater had this cool project up in the mountains where the velocities through these culverts were too high to allow fish to migrate upstream. So they retrofitted it with these cool precast domes and fake tree limbs to slow the base flows down. Some added cost, lots of added value. I'm sure the fish would agree. And cost, I've been talking about a lot. It's easy to quantify. You can quantify cost. You know cost. But value, like I just showed, it can be hard to quantify with a number and not these fun cartoon graphs I show you. But we've been working the past few years to develop the urban stream assessment procedure. And I don't have time to go into detail, but in basic terms, it takes these 5 elements, lays out common performance indicators, and then within each of these offers a wide array of quantifiable metrics to define how much value, how much function we gain by different options we might ponder. So we can define the value per dollar invested of different things we might ponder on a project. And this is our cartoon, but trust me, there's math behind this. I'm just sparing you the math at this late hour of the day. There is math to this. It's not formulaic, it's very contextual and modifiable for the context of a given project site, but this is where we're wanting to head the next 50 years so that we can know we're building the best projects we could in all the ways we should to improve quality of life. We hope you'll go along with us, and I hope through this presentation you understand why this is the direction we're headed. And so in summary, the past 50 years, the 645 project and $2.5 billion we've invested has made an enormous impact on improving quality of life. Everybody in here has contributed to that in some way. When we aggregate the remaining work on our master plans, it points to another $5 billion of potential needs. So don't worry, there's plenty of work left to do. As our city continues to expand, help us create new infrastructure that keeps us on the green line. As we reimagine older neighborhoods where the red line's unavoidable, help us create value, the value to make it worth it. It's our job to pursue value, not to be cheap, because great projects find money. And I challenge everyone in the room to pursue better outcomes beyond your technical expertise and beyond your departmental boundaries. And remember that there's a higher calling we answer to. And the better outcomes you heard from a lot of people today, they don't happen on their own. Somebody in here needs to make it happen. They don't happen on their own. They require a champion, a Barbara Biggs. Now this doesn't make our projects easier. It makes them a little harder, like this graphic, but that's what it takes to go from good to great, to paint with color and not just black and white. And as I wrap up, I just want to say thank you all for joining in today's conversation. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers, interns for having the guts to get up here and speak in front of this many people, which is not an easy thing to do. Admin for helping with that registration. The GIS desk, that was cool. That was a new thing. I got a kick out of that. Thanks to Derek Drew and the AV team for making us look and sound good all day. The Sheridan for a great venue. Ellie and Holly, true champions of great symposiums. This wouldn't happen without the work of two of you. There's no two people that do more work to make this day great than those two. There's a happy hour upstairs in the lobby for people that want to join us. We don't have drink tickets. You're going to have to pay for yourself, but they've told us that it's a fully staffed bar. And lastly, I'm eternally grateful to Scott Tucker, who 50 years ago decided to talk turkey and put a ring on capital funding.